One of them said that it is punishable under ta'zir, and that's another fraud. A third one said that this is punishable under had. Now the gentleman who said it is punishable under had, his name is Justice Karamatullah Durrani, who didn't have the good sense. He justified what he said by referring to this ayat that I've just now quoted to you, and that is the one about married adulterers only coupling with adulterers. But he misquoted it. He said marrying. Now, there again, how can you, I mean, he defeated his own argument by resorting to this particular verse of the Quran. One of the other judges in that judgment was Justice Agha Ali Haider, who said that who was one of the three judges that said that this was an un-Islamic punishment. And he gave an interesting example, and of all people he cited Maududi, where it said the punishment, this whipping punishment, it can be as mild as just taking a broom with 100 sticks and striking a person once. The object is of not injuring a person, but to bring shame to a person. Now, some of the greatest authorities in Islam, for instance, Professor Sharif, second name is far too long for me to remember or pronounce correctly. I've got it written down here. I don't want to bring it out just now. It will spoil the flow. He is a professor in Columbia University, and he was nominated in 1999 for the Nobel Peace Prize. Now, what he says is that the crime for adultery in Islam, the punishment for it has just one purpose, and that purpose is that the sexual act should not be performed in public. That's where it ends, because the evidentiary requirement is such that it is impossible to prove it. And what are the evidentiary requirements? I think we're all adults here, are we? Yes, we are. The evidentiary requirements are that there must be 4 first-hand witnesses who must have seen penetration. 1, 2, there must not be any infringement of the privacy of the couple. This is impossible to fulfill unless a person is a lunatic and decides to perform the act in public. Only then, and that's very unlikely. So these are some thoughts on the zina ordinance. I'm running out of time. So I have 5 or 10 minutes more, 5 minutes? Okay, so now I come to the prohibition order, and I wish Ayaz Amir was here. He'd bless me for it. There is no prohibition in Islam for the consumption of alcohol or intoxicants. There are 4 verses. Verse 1. In fact, 2 of them are in favor. Verse 1. In intoxicants and games of chance, there is some good and some bad, but the bad outweighs the good. Verse 2. Don't pray if you are drunk. Only start praying Only you can pray once you've sobered down, come down to Mother Earth from the ninth cloud. Verse 3, this is the work of Satan. Now, Satan needs definition. Satan is within you also in Quranic terminology. It is human nature. And all it says is, will you not refrain? And the most interesting is Surah Nahl, that's Surah 16, verse 67, which says that amongst the signs of God that we have sent you are the dates and the grapes from which you draw nourishment, as well as intoxicants. Question to you, and let's have a discussion on that afterwards. Is there prohibition? No, not in the Quran. Is there punishment? Certainly not. No punishment is prescribed. So how on God's earth do the zina, not the zina, beg your pardon, do the Hudood laws come up with the punishment of 80 lashes? Now this is absolutely ridiculous. You know what the law says, the Hudood law? That if two witnesses, for adultery, by the way, is the only crime, only offense where 4 witnesses are required. All others, 2. Now this says if 2 witnesses see you knocking it back, 2 Muslim adults, you're in for it, 80 lashes. This is what the Hudood ordinances say. But nothing happens to you. No Hudood laws are applied. If you're totally slosh and you go in for a medical examination, the medical report says that you had a very high alcohol content. No punishment. This is the Hudood laws. I'll come now to the last element of the laws, and that's property, stealing, highway robbery. There again, the geniuses who drafted the Hudood laws, they relied on Surah Maida. I'm forgetting the exact verse, but I think it is verses 33 to 34, where they talk of, there's a verse there which says it really deals with war, it deals with insurrection, and it uses 4 passive verbs, and all these 4 passive verbs are in the present tense. This is the Quran. And what does this mean in terms of law? In terms of law, let me first go to the formulation in the Quran. Those who create sedition, those who do all this, are being crucified in great numbers, are being banished from the face of the earth. So it is not a law, it is merely a statement. The geniuses who drafted the Hudood law on this subject say that it is an injunction. It is not an injunction. And the punishment that is prescribed is, under the Hudood laws, is for non-violent theft. And that is 1, cutting off. This is the first, if you rob, this is the first time you'll get this thing. You'll have to have your right hand lopped off. Cut. If you do it again, you'll have to have your left foot cut off. If you do it a 3rd time, this breaks the Guinness Book of World Records. Just imagine a guy with no hand and with one leg trying to rob again, trying to rob something. You're put in prison for life. Now this is your Hudood laws. And the judge It is wisdom and sagacity. If you've been a good prisoner with your one hand off and one leg off, if you've been a goody-goody, you are released from prison. Now, does this make any sense to anyone here? I doubt it. So what are we doing to repeal it? Before I conclude, and I'll just say one thing, that when you talk of the Quran per se, there are 2 or 3 principles that have got to be borne in mind. And this is where all the mischief is done, because we don't abide by it. One is a misinterpretation of Surah Al-Baqarah, verse 106, which says that any ayat that we now reveal is replaced. Any ayat that we revealed before is replaced by this ayat. So what has this induced? A misinterpretation, not by the West, no, by Muslims. By Muslims jurists who say that, you know, the ayats that forbid aggression, those have been cancelled by a subsequent ayat which say that you are allowed to fight. Now, this violates the Quranic law in totality. Why? Because the Quran has got to be read as a complete whole. Each verse, each ayat supports the other ayat. So it's got to be read in totality. Now, what is meant by this particular verse? The word ayat means a message. In the more restrictive sense, it applies to a verse of the Quran. What this verse was actually doing was referring to an earlier message, and that was the Jewish and the Christian scriptures. It was that message that was substituted by the Quran. The second principle that has got to be borne in mind, and this, by the way, is interesting because it appears only once in the entire Quran and is the key to understanding the Quran. This is in Surah Imran, verse 7. It's only in one place in the Quran it's mentioned that this is a book written in verses that are clear in by themselves, and the other part is purely allegorical. So, what is allegorical? Allegorical is, within the category of allegorical, comes everything that the Quran describes as ghaib. Ghaib is wrongly translated as unseen. Actually, it is something that is beyond human perception, that cannot be defined. The existence of God, how can you define that? Hell, how can you define that? Heaven, how can you define that? Time, concept of time, how can you define that? So what the Quran simply does is that it takes lone images. And what are these lone images? Hell is described in allegorical terms as fire where you will be, roasted, well done and all that. Heaven is described as rivers of milk and honey, so on and so forth.
Don't forget the hoods.
And of course, there's another subject, the hoods. Oh yes. That is also purely allegorical, and it sort of tries to recapitulate all the good and bad things that you face on earth, to try and picturize it for you in in the afterlife. And finally, this is as important, and I think I've just touched upon it briefly otherwise, and that is the decontextualizing of the Quran. You cannot take isolated verses and without relating it to the entire text and say that this is Islamic law. So these are some of the thoughts that I thought I should share with you, thoughts that I'm sure that you already knew about, in the sense that I have not really I have not tried to reinvent the wheel, but these are facts that I think all of us knew. But the question is, what have we done about it? What can be done? How are we to engage in a debate, change the erroneous concepts that we have about this great religion, which is based on human rights? I suppose the only thing that one can say, it is true that Islam guarantees people rights, but these rights will exist in vain for those people who do not have the courage to fight for their rights. So, with these words, I hope I have not I've tried to keep it to 15 minutes. I think I've spoken for 20. So forgive me for that.
Thank you.